Removing green screen effectively is one of the most challenging tasks in Photoshop, and the reason so many people struggle with it is because all the other tutorials you'll find on YouTube are only teaching one half of the process, which is getting the selection right. If you want to do it properly, there's another key step you need, which will get you perfect results every time, and I'm going to cover it all in this video, so you'll be able to go from shots like this to this very, very quickly. Okay, I'm going to get straight into this with this raw shot of Yennefer from The Witcher. This is a statue by Prime 1 that I've taken a few green screen shots of. And before we get going, let me just quickly tell you, if you want to grab a few of my green screen shots, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and then you'll find a special video for subscribers only on the channel page. And under that, you'll find a code that'll enable you to download the green screen pack I've prepared for you as part of this video. So make sure you subscribe, head over to that after you watch this video, and you'll be able to play around with my green screen shots and do some work on them. So this shot in camera raw, I'm not going to do anything special to this. I'm just going to hit auto here, probably pull the highlights down a little bit more because her face is losing a bit of detail there. But all we're really interested in is getting a good cover with the green. Now you can see with this shot, I haven't got it evenly lit. So this left side's got this lovely, vibrant green that we want for a good green screen extraction. But over here, you can see I haven't quite got enough light over here on the right side of her. It doesn't matter. As long as it's predominantly in the green sort of space, it's going to work fine. So I'm going to click open image and we'll start work. So that's going to create a new photo document here. And there is one go-to effect I use or option in Photoshop for this every single time. I never use anything else. If you've got a good green background like this, you shouldn't need anything else, which is select color range. This will do all the hard work for you. Now, when this comes up, you've got a couple of things to play with. The main thing you'll notice, as well as this dialog, is I've got a color pick here. So you can see if I just click, tap anywhere in the picture, it's selecting areas of green. Over here in the preview, it's showing me what I'm gonna select. Now by default, what it's doing is it's assuming I want to select the green. So it's going to create a selection that's going to select the green. If you remember the rules of masks, white will stay, black goes away. So what this is going to do is create a mask that'll keep the white and get rid of the black. For a green screen, that's not what we want. We want the opposite. So I'm going to click invert. And what that will mean is as I select all the green out of this, it will keep our subject here, Yennefer, in the middle, and you'll gradually see the green go away. So how do you get rid of all the green? Well, the thing you want to do is hold down Shift or Option on a Mac and drag. So I'm going to hold the Shift key down. You can see the cursor's changed. It's got that little plus in it. And then I can do multiple clicks. But the thing I like to do is actually just click and drag. So if I click, hold the mouse button down and drag. If you look at that preview over on the right, it's not quite updating on the screen, but as soon as I lift off, you can see what it's done. So I've kind of wiped through all the green and selected it. Now, if you look at the preview again, you can see there's just a little bit more down here I need to select. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to hold Shift down, click and drag. So I'm holding both Shift and the mouse key down as I'm dragging. And then I'm finally selecting all of that. You've got a couple of options in here. You've got fuzziness, which will just determine the quality of the edges. I don't ever have this too high. This is the kind of thing you can play around with afterwards. Range, I never really touch. I'll just leave that at 100%. And make sure you've got localized color clusters checked. Then I'll click OK. Now what that's done is it's loaded a mask on the document. So now what I'm going to do is come down here at the bottom of the layers panel and click add layer mask. That will immediately transfer that onto a layer mask on this layer. It's important we do that. You don't want to do a cut. So if I undo that, the other option is to do this destructively. So if we go back to that selection that's just been made, and in fact, I would need to invert it, which I can do with Control-Shift-I. And then if I did a cut, that would apply that mask permanently. That's not what we want to do. You want to add a layer mask, because the whole point with a layer mask is you can do more work to it and refine it and get it even better. Okay, so before we continue, I really want to make sure you understand what a layer mask is. It seems pretty obvious. We've got this little icon or thumbnail over the top of our image, and clearly it's doing the work of hiding some part of the image and letting the other part show. But the concept behind a layer mask and understanding what it does is really important, because the way you think about it and the way you work with it is going to help you get better results, because it's really powerful. So when you see this little thumbnail here, this is a map effectively that tells Photoshop which parts of your layer you want visible and which parts you want to hide. As I said before, I like to say white will stay, black goes away. More importantly, anything between black and white will have varying degrees of transparency. So any gray areas are going to be more opaque, and some of your layer will show through where your layer mask is gray. You can see the layer mask if you hold down Alt or Option and click on it. So now you can see what the mask actually is. So white will stay, black goes away. Anywhere there's any gray, you're going to see a little bit of the layer come through. So this little area up here where I didn't quite get coverage with the selection, that will start to poke through. It's really important to understand this, because when you're working with green screen, any of those areas around your edges that end up gray in the selection will leak green through. This is really important, and this is what so many people struggle with. So if I zoom in, where Yennefer has got this fur around her wrist, you can see there's gray. So with the selection, what's happening here is there's going to be this bleed between the black color of the fur and the green screen of the background. And this is what people struggle to get rid of. But remember, if you just think about this layer mask, this selection, the layer mask doesn't know anything about the color. All this is doing is saying, I'll keep everything that's white, get rid of everything that's black, and everything in between, the gray areas, will have varying degrees of transparency. What you have to understand at this point is you cannot make a selection that will effectively remove all the green screen. This is really important. You're going to see other videos on YouTube where people are trying to push the selection process beyond its limits to try and get rid of all the green screen. But what they're doing is they're actually removing key parts of the image. And so what I'm going to show you in the second part of this process is how you can keep all the detail of your subject, but not have the green color cast that creeps in with areas like this, where the selection process is trying to work with those opaque or transparent parts. So this selection process is two-stage. You create the selection to isolate your subject first, and that will include these green fringes. If we turn the layer mask off, you can see them there. Then you use other tools in Photoshop to recolor the green fringing. As I say, this is what so many people get wrong with green screen treatment in Photoshop, because they're trying to create a selection that removes all the green in one go, and it just won't work. It's a two-stage process. So you extract with a selection first, then you recolor. So last thing on layer mask before we move on, understand this is a completely separate image that sits alongside your layer, and it's saved in your Photoshop document with it. As you saw, I can edit and work on this layer mask completely independently from the actual layer. And you can use many of the same tools you use to work on the actual layers with. You can paint on it. You can apply a range of effects on it, albeit with the constraint that it's only ever going to be grayscale. So black, white, and everything else in between. But the point here is this is a separate document. This is a separate artifact of your image, and you want to think about it like that. And you want to kind of treat it with the same level of care and respect that you will your actual image, because it's going to affect how good your selection looks. So that's just a little aside on layer masks. I hope you've got a better understanding of what these are now. Now we're going to continue with our selection process. Okay, back to our selection process. So all I've done so far is go to color range, select color range. You saw what I did with the color picker here. Hold shift down, click on the mouse and drag over all that green area. Invert the mask to make sure our subject's selected and the background, the green area, is taken away. Then we click OK, and then I finally added a layer mask. So this is where we're at. Now to make the selection a little bit better, what I then like to use as a second step is this option, select mask. So if you've got the properties panel up here in Photoshop, you can click that, or you can right click the layer itself and you'll find that under there as well, select a mask. This comes up and there's a couple of options here. On the right here, you've now got this properties panel, which has a few options that will make changes to, I guess, the edges of the mask. So things like smoothing, feathering will make the mask a little bit less rough if you dial them up. Contrast will reduce those gray areas. So where we were just looking at the layer mask a moment ago and you saw the black that will be completely hidden, the white that will be completely visible, those gray areas in between will become more tight as you take contrast up. The problem with that is it will make more of a rough selection. So these I only ever push up a little bit. For high resolution imagery, if you're taking photos with a good quality camera like this one, these aren't as important. Most of the time when I'm doing green screen, I'm usually resizing images down a little. We'll apply a similar kind of treatment around edges. And there's other ways to do this after doing the extraction as well. So generally you just want to use this to get the mask dialed in. Shift edge I like to use, that just pulls the selection in a little bit tighter. And again, high resolution imagery, you can't do too much damage with it. If you're working with something small off the web that's low resolution, this isn't going to look great. So I mean, if I drag that down to the extremes, not sure whether the preview is going to catch up with it. But yeah, I mean, if you look around the fur there, that's really losing some of the detail. So I'm going to reset that and just apply a little bit. So say minus 14%. These are all settings that will just make the mask in your layer mask a little bit nicer to work with. And then up here, you've got some options for painting on the edges of the layer mask to try and get Photoshop to do a slightly better job with its selection. The main one I like to use is this one here, which is Refine Edge Brush Tool. So with this, what you can do is paint over areas where the masking process hasn't worked too well. You'll find if you're doing manual selections, if you're trying to cut out areas against real backgrounds, black backgrounds, white backgrounds, you'll need to lean on this a lot more. But the idea with green screen is you don't really need it, because as you can see, all my edges are pretty much spot on. There's not really any work to do here. The main things that need touching up are these fur areas. So where she has these fur cuffs, you can see it's not quite done that great a job of knocking out all the green. And so applying a little bit of a paint with this Refine Edge brush can sometimes help. Now, problem here is this is actually not that high in resolution. It's quite a small area of the photo. If this was a few sort of strands of hair on a portrait that was close up, I think you'd find it would work a lot better. I mean, this isn't too bad, but it's not done as good as a job as I would like. So if you find areas like this that don't work too well, there is another way of dealing with that, which I'll show you in a second. So I'm going to undo that and then click OK. You can see it's actually created a completely new layer with this treatment. So that's a good option with Select Layer Mask. If you don't like what it's done, you can delete the new layer and then you have the backup to work on as well. Now, one final option I didn't show you is this, decontaminate colors. So when I spoke earlier about green screen removal being a two-stage process, this is one option you have for the second stage, because part of the problem here is you can see there's all this green fringing around the edges, and what decontaminate colors will do is it will very, very cleverly try and figure out what the colors should be around the edges. Now, I never use this, and certainly not on the first pass, because for an image like this, you can see I've got a lot of spill from the green background. So I've got all these areas you can see in the hair along the body here where there's just too much green that I need to eliminate. And so decontaminate colors isn't going to be able to get in that far and figure out what this color should be instead of the green. So I never check decontaminate colors on the first pass. You can see here that option output to new layer with layer mask. We can just select layer mask and that will just update the layer mask on the document we're working with. So we'll stick with that. So before we take a look at some of these final issues with the shot here, let me just give you a couple of tips on making all this easier, and it's to do with the photography around green screen. So as I mentioned before, the higher the resolution of your image, the better results you're going to get. The tighter your green screen is to the subject, the better results you're going to get. So part of the problem with this image is the reason there's so much spill is because the green screen background was quite wide. Now, when you're doing a shoot like this, if you introduce what's called gating behind your subject, so say some black cards that I had just before her hand starts on both sides, that would prevent the green reflections. I've got another video on the channel where I go through how you can set up a green screen shoot. So make sure you check that out as well. Another tip is make sure the green background is quite bright. So I get bright green card from an office supplies store here in Australia. More recently, I've just started projecting green from a monitor I shoot everything against, which does the same job. But a bright green background is really, really important to make the masking process easier for Photoshop. So the next thing I want to do is get a better selection around these fur areas. As you can see, Selector Mask hasn't done a great job here. So this is more of an advanced skill. To do this, what I am going to do is make use of the actual image itself to create a new mask. So what I'm going to do is turn off our working layer here. So let's just rename this so you're clear on what we're doing. And I'm going to go back to the original here. So if you remember, we started out with this from Select Color Range. Then I applied Selector Mask, and that created the second copy. So I'm going to go back to the original image, and I'm actually going to get rid of the layer mask there. So now we're back to the green screen image, because this has got all the detail in it, right? If you're looking at her cuff here, where the fur is, you can see all those strands of hair in really good detail. And you can also see some of the problem here, because this is quite low in terms of resolution. These hairs aren't quite, they don't quite have enough contrast and detail for Photoshop to figure out where the detail is and where it isn't. But we can recover some of that detail almost automatically, better than we were getting through Selector Mask. So to do this, what I'm going to do is go to the Channels panel. And in here, the best thing you've got to work with is the green channel. because what this does is create a complete separation between where green is in the image and where everything else is. And so because we're shooting against green screen, you're going to get really, really good contrast on the green, and everything else is going to edge towards black. Now, this is going to create problems, but we're going to be able to work with this. So what I'm going to do is hold Control or Command down and click on that channel. What it's now done is it's created a layer, it's now created a mask based on the green channel, if that makes sense. I can click back up to RGB, go back to my layers, and now I'm going to apply this mask as a layer mask to the image. So what we've got here is actually the green channel applied as a layer mask, as opposed to what we did up here, which was color range applied to this as a layer mask. So immediately there, just comparing the difference between the two layer masks, here we've got really quite a lot of loss of detail around that fur. Here we've got a lot of problems to work on, but we've got the detail. So the first thing we're going to do is invert it. So I'm going to press Control or Command I on my keyboard. And now at least we're kind of playing in the same arena of white will stay, black goes away. But there's lots of problems here because we haven't got black. We've got gray. This is all the areas in the image that weren't quite a pure green, that green channel has loaded as almost a sort of semi-green. So it's not quite completely transparent. And likewise, the white has got lots of areas that have got spots of black in them that are going to show through. But this is good enough to work with. If I just come out of the layer mask, so if you hold Alt and click on the layer mask, it'll pop out. You can see what it's doing. So this is the green channel applied as a layer mask. It's knocking out everywhere that's green in the layer. So all we need to do now is increase the contrast between the light area and the dark area around this fur until we get a good selection that we're then going to transfer over to the working layer. So to do that, we're going to apply an effect on this layer mask. Easiest thing to do is just use a levels effect. So if you press Control or Command L on your keyboard, that'll bring levels up, and you can now play around with the contrast of your layer mask here. Other option, if you don't like the shortcuts, is just go to image adjustments and levels in there, and it will do the same thing. Remember what I said earlier. This is why I made such a big deal about talking about layer masks. They're a separate document. Everything you do on these is independent. But what's going to happen is the changes you make to the light areas, the changes you make to the dark areas are simply going to determine which parts of your layer underneath are going to be visible or not. Now, before we get started, what I actually want to do is create another layer underneath because I want to see the effect of this as we apply it. So I'm going to create a new layer, drag it to the bottom, and I'm going to fill it with 50% gray because I want to see gray come through as we apply this effect. So you can go back into the layer mask and apply this directly. If I go Control or Command L, and then what you're doing is you're pulling up the shadows until this area is black and pulling down this end until those details poke through in white. And it's really just a fight between the two ends to sort of preserve the detail or get enough of it that you've got a much, much better selection, but you're able to get rid of these areas that might creep into your final picture. So as I say, you can do it directly on the layer mask here, but I prefer to do it looking at the actual layer. So if you cancel out of this, we can click back on the layer to see it. Then what I'll do is I'll click on the layer mask. I'm not alt clicking to see it. I'm just clicking on it. And now if I press Control or Command L and get levels up. This is going to apply to the layer mask like we were just looking at it, not the layer itself. So just be aware of that selection there, that we're applying this effect to the layer mask, not the layer. Now, if I do the same thing, bring the blacks up, I just showed you this, you can see the green go away and we've got 100% gray. Obviously that's too much. If I dial it down, you can see the greens crept back in. So we want to make the gray go away, and then we want to bring the top end down and get those strands of hair coming in. So you can just see them there. Just see that detail coming in. It might be a bit too rough. This is effectively like what the contrast option did in Select to Mask. So you've got to be careful with this. And you can even play with the mid-range there. You can see what that does. And because they're hairs and they're not very fine, I'm okay with them just having a little bit of detail. So we might leave it there. So there we go. Now we've got that great detail around the hair we can work with. But we've got a wreck of a layer mask. This isn't really useful for anyone. But all we're really interested in is this part. So how do we transfer this over to our working layer? Let me show you how I do that. We've got two layer masks, same image. Remember, underneath this image is exactly the same. All that's different is this layer mask has a very, very good quality edge around it, but it has all these areas that we've successfully masked out in this layer mask. But what we want to do is transfer the detail from here to there. So how do you do this? There's a few ways you can attempt this. But remember, again, the layer masks are separate documents from the actual images. So the easiest thing to do is simply transfer this part of the layer mask to the other one. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to get the lasso tool here. And I'm working on this bottom layer mask where we got all that nice detail from applying that levels effect. And I can just carefully grab the bit I want, draw all the way around. I'm not going to go into her arm because I'm only interested in the fur part here. And I'm going to go careful around this part because I don't want to go too far into the white where there are these black areas that would be transparent. So I've got a selection around that nice fur detail. If you then press Ctrl+C, you copy that to the clipboard. You've just copied this chunk of selection of the layer mask. Then click up to the working layer selection and you can immediately see that more poor quality selection we've got there. Then if you press Ctrl+Shift+V or Command+Shift+V on Mac, that will do paste special. So paste in place. The reason this is important is because you want to paste it exactly in the same place as where you copied it from. If you just do a straight paste, it could kind of go somewhere else in the layer mask. So I do Ctrl+Shift+V and you can see it pops it over the top. Now I can get rid of the selection, Control or Command D, and let's take a look at the result. I'm going to turn off that the previous layer we were working with, and I'm going to turn back on working layer here. And if you zoom in, you can just see we've got that detail around the fur coming back alongside all that good selection work that Color Range did. So obviously I would need to apply the same treatment to this part of the fur, same up here. If you're working with hair, you may want to do a similar thing. But this is the process of how you can get a really, really good selection. If you look at it now, it looks great. The last part of the puzzle is getting rid of all this green fringing, and we're going to take care of that in the next part. So color casts, as I mentioned earlier, decontaminate colors is one way to do it. If you've got images like this where you've got more of a problem with color spill, this is how I like to do it. I'm going to get rid of that second layer. All I'm going to do is put a layer on top, and I'm going to call this hue, and I'm going to change the blending mode of this to hue. I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to call this color, and I'm going to change the blending mode of that to color. Both of these I am going to clip to this layer, and what I'm going to do with these is paint on them. So effectively, I'm going to paint over the top of the green areas with the colors they should be. By putting these layers in these blending modes, what will happen is the paint will apply the color but not the luminosity to the subject below. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to get the brush. If you look at the hair area here, this green spill, the color it really should be at this side is kind of this grayish color here, okay? So if I get the paintbrush here, go a little bit smaller. If you hold down Alt or Option, you'll get the color picker up, and then it's simply a case of selecting a color from an area where you believe, you know, the actual green should be. The reason I do both color and hue is you get different results. So sometimes color works better, sometimes hue works better. So you want to kind of start on one, paint over. You can see that's a bit too blue. I'll undo that. I might go over to color, try it again, and that's a bit better. Sometimes you have to resample. So you might have to take a couple of shots at this to find colors that work a little bit better. I can see there's a bit too much blue in this color. So again, I could come in here, just desaturate this a bit manually because I'm just working with a color, and then try it again. So you can see now that's a bit more gray. I'd probably want to bring that up. Remember, it's just a color. So I can go back, change it again, come back in here, paint over it another time. Point is, I'm just recoloring that area of her hair to be the color I expect it to be, not the green. You can work with a hard brush if you wish. Soft is probably better. And then the edges where you're just covering the green will feather in nicely with the areas you aren't. On this side, you can see there's more of a rim light effect. So I might want to pick that more bright color. Oh, I've gone too far with it. I'll make the brush smaller. And again, that's a little bit too bright. So we might desaturate that a bit. And I'm just going to be a little bit more careful with this and just try and hit the very edges where it's gone green and leave everything else. So you have to work around the document, and it's a case of constantly sort of just resampling colors as you go around the edges to find the colors that are going to work best for the point of the document you're in. And go over to the shoulder here. There's a little bit of a blue tone there that we're not getting through. This might be one where I flip over to hue, but bear in mind if I do that, because I've painted over the top here, that's not going to show through. So I might have to go to the eraser, get rid of that, come down to hue, and go back to the paintbrush. Try sampling that color again, and then just keep painting on top until I dial in something that's close to what I want. Let's come and look at our fur area here. Now, because we've got so much of this green fringing, we should just be able to go straight over the top of it with the inside of that fur color, and it just takes away all of that green and leaves us with the detail of that fur preserved. And you can just see those strands there coming off right up close. So you get the idea, and I can do the same around the body here. This is a bigger area. So this is literally all there is to it. It's just a case of working around the document and painting out the green. Very quick, very effective, and you get a perfect recolored image straight off your green screen. Okay, so I've just gone over the whole document, just painted out all these areas, and it's pretty much done. With the color and the hue applied and the layer mask, you could combine all these. So Typically what I do is I will shift select the lot, right click and convert to a smart object. Then I can work with that in one hit, and then if I want to make little alterations later, I can do. Remember, you've still got the mask, so if you're not happy with anything, you can still go back and use any of the tools I've showed you and do further work on the mask. So I could come here, select a mask. I could try retreating the fur. Nothing will change. You might even find it easier now we've got these color layers above the image to kind of see what the effects of some of those techniques I showed you are with the color applied. One final tip I would give you is I've done this on a 50% gray layer. I encourage you to do it on your actual document. So whatever the background is you're using for your extraction, do this recolorization process on that. Other thing I sometimes do is actually use either red or blue. So I might go in here and do a quick fill, pick a 100% red color. And what that will do is it will kind of just make any green areas contrast against the red, and it makes it a little easier to spot when you're doing this painting process. Last thing is check the quality of your mask. Just with that red on there, if I go back into the mask, I saw there's a couple of little areas where black's crept in. So come back into your mask, get your brush, set it to white or black should you need, and I'm going to need a really hard brush for this just to make sure I'm not leaving any transparent spots. You want to check all over your mask. You can see there's a little white area there. I'll get black, get rid of that. Up here there's a couple of little spots we missed in the original extraction. So you want to get your mask really high quality, and then you're not going to have any problems with little areas like that leading into your composite when you're finished. So that's pretty much it. I hope you've enjoyed this. This is the basis for every single composite I do. And I churn through this stuff really quickly because I use these techniques on probably 30 photos at a time, and I want to get through them fast. So this procedure is very fast for me because I've done it so much. It becomes very quick, much quicker than the time it's taken to explain this in this tutorial. I'll typically apply this in a batch. So if I've got 30 photos I want to use, I'll apply this process to all of them in one go, and then I've got these great selections to work with immediately. It's not a case of getting one done, then another, doing a bit of work on the composite I'm working on and having to go back and do the extraction process. I like everything done in one hit so I can then play around with the various extractions I've made and work with them immediately. As I said at the start of the video, I've dropped a couple of my green screen videos on Gumroad. If you subscribe to the channel and then head over to the channel page, there's a special subscriber video for you there. In the comments, you'll find the code to get that. And I'd love it if you can smash that like button on this video. And if you've got any questions, if any of this didn't make sense, please leave me a comment below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Head to ToyShooter.com for more tutorials, resources, and help with Photoshop compositing. You can also subscribe to my free newsletter by visiting shoot.toys in your browser or clicking on the link on screen. You can also follow my work on Instagram at instagram.com/shoot.toys. Subscribe to the channel to watch a special subscriber-only video, which you'll find on my channel page after subscribing. Lastly, you'll find links to all the places I've just mentioned in the description for this video below.